The Lord of the Rings Tales of Middle-earth is the second of the Universes Beyond line from Magic the Gathering. With it comes 4 pre-constructed commander decks featuring some new cards from the set, as well as some reprints from throughout Magic's history. In this series, we will be going over some of the newer cards from each deck, what reprints are the most exciting, and lastly, we'll be discussing some choice picks to help make the deck more powerful. Hostess Mordor is a blue, black, and red deck led by Sauron, Lord of the Rings. The deck has a few main strategies. The first utilizes the Amass Orcs mechanic, generating an Orc army token that grows as we play our spells. The Amass mechanic is pretty simple. If you do not control an army token, you create a 0/0 army token, and then you put +1/+1 counters on it equal to the value of the Amass trigger. If you already control an army, you simply add the counters. In addition, if you already have an army token that does not have the characteristics of the army that you are creating, like in this deck, Orcs, your current army token will gain this typing before the counters are added on. The secondary strategy deals with reanimating creatures. We have a number of spells that will bring back creatures from the graveyard as a means to cheat their mana values. Let's begin by looking at our commanders. Starting off is Sauron, Lord of the Rings. Sauron is an 8 mana 9/9 avatar horror. Whenever you cast this spell, amass Orcs 5, mill 5 cards, and then return a creature from your graveyard to the battlefield. It also has trample. Whenever a commander an opponent controls dies, the ring tempts you. This is a lot to unpack. For starters, being a 9/9 with trample is brutal and very difficult to effectively block without it making some contact with your life total. This card is giving me Thraxamundar vibes, though with a lot more value tacked onto it. The cast trigger is interesting because unlike a lot of other commanders, this ability does not actually trigger upon it entering the battlefield, so it does get around abilities that negate ETB abilities. The Amass Orcs 5 means that it will be coming down with a 5/5 Orc army token at the very least, unless you've gotten another army already built up, at which point it just gets much bigger. Milling 5 and then choosing a creature to reanimate can be even more effective should you pack your deck with valuable creatures to put into the graveyard. The last ability, letting the ring tempt you each time an opponent's commander dies, is also valuable in that this deck we will go on brand and have Sauron be our ring bearer, adding even more value onto him. Having said that, I really wish this wasn't an 8 mana commander, and I'm unsure how this will fare given its steep casting cost in colors that aren't really ramping effectively. The secondary commander of the deck is Saruman, the White Hand. Saruman is a 4 mana 2/5 avatar wizard. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell, amass Orcs X, where X is that spell's mana value. Goblins and Orcs you control have Ward 2. This will play into some of this deck's themes as we do have a decent number of Goblins and Orcs at our disposal, and the Ward mechanic will make removing them a touch more difficult. This is also going into the Amass Orc army mechanic, giving us another token that we can build up. The deck comes with a few new cards of considerable consideration. Cavern Horde Dragon is a 9 mana 6/6 that costs X less to cast, where X is the greatest number of artifacts an opponent controls. It has flying, trample, and haste. Whenever it deals combat damage to a player, you create a treasure token for each artifact that that player controls. This is an interesting answer to decks that like to abuse Dockside Extortionist and Mana Rocks, meaning this most times will not cost you 9 mana. Lord of the Nazgul is a 4/3 Wraith Noble for 5 mana with flying. Wraiths you control have protection from ring bearers. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, you create a 3/3 black Wraith creature token with menace. Then if you control 9 or more Wraiths, Wraiths you control have base power and toughness of 9/9 until end of turn. That is one hell of an ability. This takes what Tauran's Sky Summoner does in making creature tokens for your instants and sorceries, and cranks it up to 11. I feel that of the legendary creatures introduced in this set, this is one of my favorite designs, as any instant or sorcery you cast will also bring with it additional upside. And depending on how you've progressed your board state, you can turn a simple instant into a game-winning combat trick. Because the tokens have menace, if you swing in and an opponent either chooses not to block or cannot, you could drop an instant or two to reach that 9th Wraith token, and a lot of them get a power and toughness recount. This also includes Lord of the Nazgul, as he is a Wraith. That can bring you from 8 tokens attacking for a total of 24 damage, all the way up to 8 tokens swinging for 72 damage. I'm a musician and have trouble repeatedly counting past 4, but that is lethal for the table if I'm correct. This deck also came with a good selection of reprints, including some powerful competitive staples. Reanimate, perhaps the best reanimation spell in the game, got a reprint here. Being a 1-drop spell, this can help you cheat out some of the biggest creatures in your graveyard, and you can work around that life loss that Reanimate causes. Living Death is back again, and I'm thankful that we got some of these really good competitive level spells in Precon decks so that more players have access to them. Notion Thief is here, and again is a staple in a lot of competitive decks. This is a great answer to wheel effects and greedy card draw engines, as it punishes them both by letting you draw instead of your opponents. So before we talk upgrades, I do want to talk about something. Don't get me wrong, this Precon deck has a lot of good cards in it. I love Northern Nazgul, I love Reanimate and Living Death. I think there's a lot of really interesting designed cards in this deck, but there are a few problems that I've had with it while play testing the deck. Maybe it's just me, but I wanted to note it before you drop $50 or more on a product. Feel free to comment below your opinions. This deck's construction just seems off. For starters, the mana curve is entirely too high for my taste and my playstyle. I get that this was designed to enhance Saruman's ability, giving us greater values for the amass ability. The deck being Reanimator focused also does play into this, and it is fun to bring back huge Haymaker cards to cheat mana costs. But this also comes with a greater risk of opening hands being too clogged up with garnets and little board development. And while yes, you can take a mulligan and take another shot at getting some playable cards, it feels like this deck needs its mana curve to chill out by quite a bit. Our commander is an 8 mana value spell, so unless we start investing in a lot of fast mana in rituals, i.e. expensive cards, we are in it to drag out the game until we can start doing things. The deck only runs 4 1-drop spells, and aside from Soul Ring, none of us help us develop a board state early game. I also feel like the cards in the deck are lacking cohesion. This is meant to be the quote bad guy deck, and it has a lot of the antagonist characters from Lord of the Rings present, and I'm all here for the villains. This is likely one of the 2 decks I will be working with further in the coming weeks from this set, but a lot of what this deck does is meander. We have the amass mechanic at our disposal, but those cards only really net us 1 giant orcish army token, and the rest is just higher mana value creatures. Even our board wipes are clunky, with Blasphemous Act only really becoming relevant the more creatures are on the board. Decree of Pain is always going to cost us 8 mana. Languish is the best bet at 4 mana, and so this deck is just going to struggle against faster decks like the other 3 Precon decks. That being said, this is in Grixis, which has recently become one of my favorite competitive decks to build, and you can absolutely add in better reanimation targets to make this deck a lot fiercer. This deck does want to smack your opponent hard with a few beefy bonks, and we can absolutely make that happen. You may remember recently we covered a competitive build for one of the other variants of Sauron, which I highly recommend watching if this deck is something you're interested in going higher power with. I would absolutely begin by adding in a lot more ramp. The talismans are by and far some of the best mana rocks you can include, Felwar Stone, Wayfarer's Bauble, just to really make sure that we can start developing our board on the early turns. If you want more expensive mana, Dark Ritual, Cabal Ritual, Culling the Weak, Sacrifice, they're all going to net you extra mana to get out our chonky commander quicker. And I guess if you want to go really intense, you can always add in the Power 4. From the main set, we have Palantir of Orthanc, which will help us mill ourselves, building further into the Reanimator strategy. Maher Uruk-hai Captain is a pretty neat as a means to up the amass mechanic in the deck. This acts in a sense as a harness scales from our armies, goblins, and orcs, which is pretty potent on a 2-drop. Now let's address the elephant in the room. The Lord of the Nazgul is really where I think that they'll shine the best, but you can and absolutely should add in all different 9 copies of the Nazgul into the deck, as it is entirely on theme, and it adds to the ring tempting mechanic on our commander. We might not always be able to destroy our opponent's commanders, but these just entering the battlefield will tempt us and further that strategy. Yes, Orcish Bowmasters is in the deck. It gives us a passive amass trigger and is a piece to punish greedy card draw engines, and it's on theme. Witch King of Angmar is another method to help us work with our commander's abilities. It can punish opponents for attacking us, and it has a means to protect itself while also filling our graveyard with more goodies for us to reanimate. Commence the Endgame is another neat means to pump up a huge army token. Yes, this is high on the curve at 6 mana, but it's also an excellent way to help us push through should we only need a little bit more power on our army. Call of the Ring gives us card draw and a ring tempt trigger each turn. I think this is going to start seeing a lot more play than Necropotence due to it being a lot more flexible in casting, even better than something like Phyrexian Arena in casual. One ring to rule them all also gives us a tempting trigger, and this does quite a bit of work if Sauron is our ring bearer. 9 cards milled for each player is a huge chunk of cards to help us get our deck to do its thing. We can also include a better Reanimator package into this deck easily, cards like Buried Alive, Animate Dead, Entomb, Persist, Goryo's Vengeance, Shallow Grave, Necromancy, All will give us juicy options to either put things in the graveyard or bring them back. And because we're in Grixis colors, a classic Underworld Breach combo line can bump this up into more competitive territory, or a Thoracle in Consultation, or even Dual Caster Mage and Twin Flame. With that being said, this is going to wrap up our look at Hostess Mordor. I hope you enjoyed this video, I hope it was helpful in your deck building if you are choosing this deck. Remember to like and share this video with your playgroup if it did, subscribe if you're new here, and as always, thank you for watching. I'll catch you all next time.